Okay, this is Dave Winkler with Naval Historical Foundation, Naval History Book Reviews Author Chats. And today we are with Corbin Williamson. Uh, and we're going to be talking about his book, The U.S. Navy, His Cold War Alliances, 1945, 1953. A little bit about Corbin. He grew up in, I think it was the Houston, Texas area. Therefore, he goes to Texas A&M to get his bachelor's. I believe he studied with Jim Bradford, a Knox Award winner for the Naval Historical Foundation. You go on to Texas Tech, and then you earn your PhD at The Ohio State University. You served as a fleet professor, College of Distance Education, Naval War College, which is something I'm trying to do right now. And then you were at the Historical Office of Secretary of Defense. You worked on the official history of the Secretary of Defense from 1973 to 1976. Very important years. You're looking at the post-Vietnam and going to an all-volunteer military. Finally, you're now at the Air War College, where you are teaching history strategy. But you finished up this book here, so let's talk about that. There you are. So hello.
Hey, Dave.
Congratulations. So let's. What led you to this topic?
So I got interested in this topic as I was in grad school looking for a dissertation topic and reading about the way in which the U.S. Navy cooperated with the Royal Navy during World War II. My master's thesis looked at repairs done on British warships in American shipyards under Lend-Lease in 1941. And there'd been a lot written about wartime relations, but I was interested in, so what happened to all that after the war? I knew that after World War I, despite having operated closely with the Royal Navy, the U.S. Navy had not put a lot of effort into sustaining those links for obvious reasons and good reasons. So did that happen again after World War II? And so I was interested to see what came of all of the cooperation and Navy-to-Navy ties that had been developed.
And so what, I guess stepping back a little further is what led you to to get interested in history in the first place?
So I've always been interested in history. I mean, even as a kid, my family would like to go to Civil War battlefields on vacations. And so I was, reading history books when I was in junior high school and high school. And then decided I wanted to stick with it in college. I went up to Texas A&M as a high school senior to meet some of the faculty up there. I talked to Bruce Vandervoort, who was one of their well-known Civil War historians, and he said, "No, you got to come here to study military history." I suppose one way I'll put it sometimes is that I'm still in my G.I. Joe phase. I just have to use footnotes now. So.
Okay, so you develop this, and you get your dissertation. This is all focused at the Ohio State University. Who'd you study under there?
So my advisor was Dr. John Gilmartin,
Mm-hmm.
who was a retired Air Force officer, flew rescue helicopters in Vietnam, and then went to Princeton to get his degree, and then wrote a couple books on Mediterranean sea power in the ancient world about galleons and galleys. So he was my advisor. He unfortunately passed away the year after I finished, and so, or not, if not the year after, the year after that. And so Colonel Peter Mansour, who was General Petraeus' XO, was my kind of secondary advisor along with him.
Okay. So what's unique about, as you pointed out, after World War II, of course, it's Pax Americana as far as the seas are concerned. We defeated Japan and Germany. The Soviet Union is yet to pose any blue water threat. So we're now actually, contrary to what George Washington warned about in alliances, we're now interested in starting to build these alliances. And how is that how do these ties? Obviously, we're building on relationships that were formed during World War II.
Yeah, so the initial, I should back up. The British in the late stages of the war, especially in 44 and really as you get into 45, have already started to think about, so what do we want our relations with the Americans and inside the Admiralty, the U.S. Navy, to look like after the war? And so Admiral James Somerville, who's the head of the British Admiralty delegation stationed in Washington, meets a couple of times with Admiral King and with Secretary of the Navy, James Forrestal, and says, hey, can we retain these links into the post-war world? And King and Forrestal are supportive, but they're not willing to commit to any sort of specific exchanges. At Potsdam, the British will try and get the Americans to agree to continue the combined chiefs of staff after the war. And Truman and Marshall say, yeah, we want to have good relations, but we can't commit to what looks like a military alliance. It's when, in naval circles, the U.S. Navy gets real interested in, sorry, we have motion sensor lights that forget that I'm still in here. The U.S. Navy gets real interested in exchanges with the Royal Navy when they start doing some trials on captured German submarines. So we get access, as we do the British and the Soviets, to the Type 21 and other advanced German submarine designs that are equipped with snorkels and teardrop hulls. And they run some exercises in early 46 and recognize that these submarines are significantly more capable than the Type 7s, the Type 9s, the standard German submarines of the Second World War. And the concern is that in a war with the Russians would be able to deploy large numbers of these submarines that would then cut the North Atlantic sea lanes and prevent the United States from deploying forces or supporting Britain or Western Europe. So there's this concern about the Soviet naval threat, on both sides of the Atlantic, as well as in Canada for that matter. And that's what initially drives the effort to sustain the wartime links, is this common shared threat or shared concern about the Soviet naval threat. So it begins in the anti-submarine world and grows into other elements of the Navy as the years go by, but that's kind of where it really begins.
Of course, I guess ultimately we share the atomic weapons formula with the Brits. So that's I don't know if you cover that, maybe peripherally. Jeff Barlows has written quite a bit on this era. How do you build on what he accomplished?
So he's got, as you said, two really great books that look at the post-war U.S. Navy. The Revolt of the Admirals is, I think, the best book ever written on that particular subject. The Navy's struggle over the creation of the Department of the Air Force and a separate Air Force, and then more recently from Cold War to Hot, which looks at U.S. Navy national security, the U.S. Navy's role in national security affairs from 45 to 55. So he's covering roughly the same period that I am. I think what his book provides the overall policy and strategic context within which the organizational links that I'm looking at take place. He talks about some of the exercises that I look at, like the exercises in the Western Pacific right before the Korean War. And he does a great job of covering the development of the NATO command structure, which is obviously a part of all of this, discussions about who's going to be SACLANT and who's going to be SACMED and that sort of thing. So I certainly am in no way trying to repeat what he's done, but I do hope that what I'm doing builds on it by emphasizing the Navy-to-Navy links between these four navies.
Okay. The fact that the end year date for your book is 1953, obviously that's the end of the Korean War. So I'm assuming that you used the Korean War kind of as a case study here to talk about how this alliance kind of actually works in practice.
Yeah, the Korean War serves as kind of the first test of the efforts that have gone into retain World War II era interoperability. In general, they find that the steps that have been taken to retain that ability to work together have been successful. that there's considerable progress that's been made. In part, that's because a lot of the personnel who fight in the Korean War know each other or benefit from relations they build up either during World War II or afterwards. It's very much a World War II type Navy in all of these countries that kicks off the Korean War in 1950. And so at the same time in Korea, you'll see in a lot of the reports or letters, between officers, there's a lot of conversation about the multinational character, especially on the west coast of the Korean Peninsula, of the naval operations that are taking place. And there seems to be a level of recognition that this is probably the way things are going to happen more often than not in the future, and that this is kind of new, and that this is what we need to be thinking about the way naval operations will look like on into the rest of the Cold War. So you can see that recognition of this multinational character that's growing in that 50 to 53 period.
Okay. Well, carrying that forward, because a recent CNO talked about the 1,000-ship Navy, and it sounds like, this is taking this forward, 70 years. What are some of the things that current policy folks, in the Pentagon may take away for, lessons that might be applicable for today?
So I think there's two things that came out of my study that can be of use today. One would be that it is the relationships upon which many of these naval and military efforts and coalitions depend are built over time. Trust, there's a great book by Randy Papadopoulos and Gary Weir and Sandy Doyle all worked on called "You Cannot Surge Trust." I would 100% agree with that. That it's not that's not a muscle that you can just simply pick up and start working and employing. It has to be built and sustained and maintained over time. It requires effort. It requires investment. These navies recognized it at that time. I think the U.S. Navy recognizes it today, and things like RIMPAC or bringing foreign officers to the Naval War College reflect that understanding that these types of relationships need to be maintained. The other thing that I found that was interesting was that efforts to standardize doctrine could proceed more rapidly than efforts to standardize equipment, and that actually having standard doctrine and operating procedures aided efforts to standardize equipment. Common requirements set the basis for common platforms. That never happened to the degree that anybody thought it would, because nobody wanted to fully give up shipbuilding industries or torpedo making industries or aircraft industries. There's economic and domestic political considerations that limit standardization, but they were able to standardize doctrine and tactical publications, signal manuals, more rapidly than they were equipment. There was one Canadian naval officer I ran across who said that standardized equipment is great so long as it's all made in Toronto.
Well, one of the things that also contributes is, I guess, professional military exchanges, PMEs. Before World War II, we didn't do much of that. Does that change after World War II?
Yes. So we have a couple British and Canadian officers who take the version of the course that's being offered at the Naval War College in 1944 and 1945. It actually involved them going to a couple different places. They would spend some time at Norfolk, they spent some time in Washington, they spent some time in Newport. So it was kind of a series of stages in that program. So we have some Canadian and British officers who are attending that version of the War College late in the war. That continues after the war. And so there's British and Canadian officers that attend the Naval War College when it's restored to its normal junior and senior course after World War II under Admiral Spruance. They continue up until 1950, and they're the only foreign officers who are there. The problem they run into in 1950 is that there's increasing, as after NATO's created, there's a sense within the U.S. military that they don't want to be seen to play favorites. And they're concerned that the French, that other NATO nations, although it's the French in particular, are going to ask to send their officers to Newport or the National War College. And the U.S. Joint Chiefs don't think that that's a good idea. They're concerned about the information, being leaked or taken out of the French military. So what they decide to do is, instead of continuing to play favorites, they kick the British and the Canadians out. They say, we're just not going to do this for anybody. So they're kicked out in 1950. This causes a fairly big row with the Royal Navy. The British are furious. Their argument is, we have American officers who come to our Naval War College, and they come to the Imperial Defense College, their version of the National War College, and we let you see everything that y'all want to see. And yet now apparently we can't go to Newport and be inside the classes and be participating in those. What they come up with later in the 50s, I'm pretty sure it's 1955, is the Naval Command Course, which is specifically designed at Newport to bring foreign officers to Newport. It's a course that's designed specifically for them, and obviously that's a tradition of having foreign officers at Newport, and as well as at my school at the Air War College, that's continued since then. So they work it out. But sorry, I have to remind the room that I'm here. But so that's kind of how the post-war development of PME takes place with respect to the Royal Navy.
Okay. Is there any other hot aspects of the book that you'd like to cover here before we wrap it up?
So I think one of the other interesting things that I ran across was that one of the reasons that the U.S. military is reluctant to play favorites, there's the NATO element, but there's also a sense in the immediate post-war years, so 46 and 47, the feeling in the United States is that if the United States or the U.S. military has overly close military ties with any foreign country, that will be seen as undermining the United Nations. The thinking was that one nation-to-nation military ties are selective, and they're not broad and universal in the way that the UN is. And so it's running contrary to the UN. And there was a great level of confidence on both sides of the political spectrum and across American society. There's a lot of confidence in the United Nations and its ability to secure world peace and to provide for security around the world. Obviously, today there's a much more controversial view of the United States, of the United Nations. People are not nearly as confident in its ability to achieve those aims, but that was true at this early period, and so that shaped the way that the military, the U.S. military, related to other militaries. They didn't want to do anything that would lead to charges of them being seen to undermine the UN. And I thought it was really interesting. It's not something I expected to find going in.
No, that's not an aspect that I thought of. And when you think about it, during the Korean War, collective security, because the Russians decided we're boycotting the Security Council, actually came into play, and our effort in Korea was a United Nations effort. That's never going to happen again. So that's an interesting aspect that you bring out. So talk about where can you get the book? This was published by I guess University Press of Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
That fine maritime state. Oklahoma's been publishing quite a few good naval books too. So can you talk about how you can get it? I guess is there a website?
Yeah, so you can get it. It's available on the University Press of Kansas website. It's also on Amazon.
Okay.
If you search for U.S. Navy and its Cold War alliances, yeah, you can find it. I had a great experience with Kansas. Really enjoyed working with them. I like the way that the book came out. Just had a great experience working with them all around. They said that they wanted to they wanted to do a little more naval history, and I said, hey, I can help with that.
Okay, superb. Okay, well, congratulations on the publication, and again, thanks for participating in Naval History Book Review Author Chats. We look forward to posting this in the very near future. Take care.
Well, thanks, Dave.
will be in, well, we'll stay in touch.